This is just the beginning.
Welcome to our Global Data-Driven Change virtual event. I'm Ina Fried, Chief Technology Correspondent at Axios. I'm coming to you from my home in San Francisco, California. Thank you to Intel for making this conversation possible. And welcome to all of you, our audiences on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, and of course, via Axios.com. Please follow along using the hashtag Axios Events and @Axios on Twitter. Over the next 30 minutes, we're going to unpack how data can help solve some of the biggest challenges we face as a society, but also raises important issues around equity and fairness. And we want to look at these. And there's no one that I'm more eager to have this conversation with than our first guest, who is the founder and CEO of Shift7 and the former Chief Technology Officer of the United States, Megan Smith, who's joining us from Washington, D.C. Megan, hi and welcome.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Ina. Great to be here.
So we're friends, and I have never, I don't believe, had the chance to interview you on stage at an event. So I'm really glad we're doing this, especially around this issue of data, because I know you've spent a lot of time, both during your time in government as well as since you've left, really looking at how data can show us the equities and inequities of society and help us make better decisions, and also looking at how do you make sure that the data itself isn't reinforcing the biases that we already have in society. And maybe if we can start with that first part. So what are some of the ways that you've seen data really illustrate a problem and help solve an issue?
There's so many ways. One of my favorite ones actually gets to both points, which we have a graphic for, which is it's really someone that they're called Pudding, thepudding.com. I love the internet. People do amazing things on it. And this group, Polygraph, they looked at who spoke in films, and then they just measured it. And they looked at gender as the graphic that I have, and it shows how many men speak, how many women speak in 2,000 films that we're very familiar with. And when you see the graphic, it's just like, wow. And what we want in society is we want to hear from lots of men and lots of women. So we need to rebalance what we're doing in our media, so that helps us see how extreme the problem is. Certainly as we have algorithms operating on data sets, if the data sets are all biased and the algorithms have bias because we're not having a balanced team make them, we can really hurt society, or we could help society. Those are sort of two directions there. One of my favorite uses of data was the census team. I mean, think of census. It's one of the biggest data things, right? Organizations. And the administration, you see things like, we all have mapping on our phone or other kinds of things, and data sets are flying off, the shelf into our phone through APIs from government for location data and mapping and those kind of weather, one of the great, multi-billion-dollar industry out of open public data coming from the 18th century and like the naval observatories where that all started. With those people. But, what we did with census was try to look at data sets that were not private data, like some kind of IRS data, but public data sets that could be mobilized in the same way into apps. And so that we started the Opportunity Project at that time. And some of my favorite ones were things like, going to the Housing and Urban Development, the HUD team, and saying to them, what are you guys trying to accomplish? And then they'd say, housing mobility, housing affordability, all the key things. And they could then say, instead of saying, can you make us a website, we say, okay, Airbnb, Redfin, Zillow, startups, Civic Tech, everybody over here, and run a hackathon and sort of a sprint on what kind of features could some of the larger apps make, and what kind of new applications could happen that HUD could facilitate, just like, say, mapping apps that we have. Same kind of idea, but think about every agency and all of the needs that we have across all of society, from Department of Agriculture, Department of Justice, everybody. How can we make a free, fairer, better society using these data sets? And so mobilizing census to support that was a key move.
And that's obviously the positive side of data, is all the insights you can gather when you really look at the information that we already had, but now are able to process in new ways. The flip side is how much of that data can reveal personal information, can result in a lack of privacy. And I'm curious how concerned you are. One of the examples that's really caught my attention is there's examples of the government going out and buying data, and so therefore it's decided it doesn't need a warrant. How important is it that we have rules on government use of data, whether it's facial recognition data or even, data that's just out there? In this case, it was location data sets, but a lot of concerns, obviously, if you can just go out and buy data sets, especially when we've had things like apps targeted at Muslims that then go ahead and sell that data. That's a potentially really scary use of big data.
Yeah, incredibly scary. And, so we have to be really diligent and we have to focus on this. There can be employment discrimination, housing discrimination, personal, detriment socially for you. Like China has social scores. Like we don't want a surveillance society. So we have to work together. One of the key ways that I believe, and we found in our work, both through Shift 7 and also earlier, the more we bring all different skill sets together into the problem and lots of different kinds of people, we're more likely to see how we might fix it. Also using a methodology called Scout and Scale. Venture capitalists don't make the companies, they look for people, talented entrepreneurs. We can look around our society and see who's already fixed things. One of my favorite examples of that was the teams who worked on police data initiative and data-driven justice. What they did in that case is they looked around and, there's so many people in our country, people are doing innovative things, but just no one knows, right? Their neighbors don't know. But we found that Dallas was opening up data sets. Camden had half their murder rate and reduced police violence by large proportions. Miami had gone from 7,000 people in prison to 4,700, closed a jail, and saved $12 million by changing how they were, instead of having people go to jail if they have substance abuse or mental health disorders, they were going to services. And so 50,000 inbounds became only 109 arrests. These kinds of uses of data are great, but then we have to share and we have to talk to each other. So with the Police Data Initiative, Data-Driven Justice, we went from a handful of cities to 20 to 70 to 120 who are working together in a community of practice. So that's a methodology that you can use, but we have to be in collaboration. And the second thing I would add, Joy Buolamwini, who created the Algorithmic Justice League, we work a lot with her today. She did, face recognition and racism that we're seeing. We recognize white males of a certain age in the 90th percent and younger or older women of color down below and everybody in between. That technology is ready for prime time. So our laws have to prevent it from being deployed just because one group it's working for and one group it's not. It has to work for everybody. And Joy makes the great point that everyone has a face. So everyone is welcome in the conversation. It's just not for the tech community to decide on behalf of all of us, especially because they face extraordinary bias in their hiring practices and their team's dismissiveness to people who are not of a certain group.
What role do you think the government does have to play then in terms of ensuring that these algorithms are created fairly, that the right people are in the room? Where do you see the line between where the government can step in and sort of both mandate best practices, if you will, versus what can be left to the industry to self-regulate?
I think many different opportunities there. One of them is to become very fluent in these technologies, because the more fluent you are across all of sectors of society, whether you're government like civic tech, data science and government, or whether you're in nonprofits or philanthropy, social sector, community organizing, or commercial, being more fluent in data science, that means having more data people in your team included, not because they're better or it's just their teammates, just like you'd have a surgeon general if you were going to, or CDC leader if you were going to talk about medical things. So whether it's precision medicine or justice opportunities or ways to solve equality, hack the pay gap was a wonderful thing that some of our colleagues did with hundreds of data scientists. So the key there is less about what and more about who is in the government teams, who is actually in the tech teams. Are they more balanced? And how do we get more of society at the table together? So that we're more fluent as we work on this. And also one of my favorite things is more active STEM learning, more engagement by our youth. There's no reason why young people aren't doing data as part of their pre-kindergarten all the way, through college. And we see things like the Data Science Federation out of Los Angeles, which is where young people in college actually work on city problems posted by the city as prototypes for school projects. How fun how impactful the work on something that matters as a young person, that can happen across. So the DQ Institute has great things there as well.
Well, real quick, in the short time we have left, I'm curious, obviously, in the Obama administration, you and some of your deputies, DJ Patel is the chief data scientist, did a lot of work, and that got started. What would you encourage the incoming administration to do when it comes to big data and use of government use of data?
Yeah, prioritize this topic, prioritize everybody building dashboards and really asking, especially if you're a new secretary, who's my data scientist? Who's my chief tech officer that I can blend in with all my other exceptional leaders? This is a team sport. And so having those capabilities, not only as a supplier, but as somebody who is in there in your team who speaks the language. When you close the door, you procure much better. We can save a lot of money if we do things like this. We had a data science cabinet that we built, which was really taking the data scientists and community practice across all the different agencies from state, agriculture, others, and having them help each other. So lots of community organizing of innovation that can happen, and making sure we have lots of colleagues working together across sectors and really prioritize diversity, equity, and inclusion in these teams, and prioritize these topics and these capabilities is essential.
Well, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you so much, Megan, for helping shine a light on the power of data and the importance of having the right people in the room and a more inclusive group of people in the room. Thanks so much, Megan.
Thanks, Ina.
And next up, we have our View from the Top segment with Axios Chief People Officer, Dominique Taylor.
Thank you, Ina. I'm delighted to be joined today by Sandra Rivera, the Executive Vice President and Chief People Officer at Intel, where she leads the Human Resources Organization and is responsible for driving better business outcomes through a culture that embraces diversity and inclusion. Welcome, Sandra.
Thank you, Dominique. I'm very happy to be here.
Sandra, you and I are in similar roles, albeit in very different industries, but we share a passion for technology, data, and perhaps most importantly, diversity and inclusion, which is where I'd like to start our conversation today. So please share with me why Intel is making diversity and inclusion such a public priority.
Well, we firmly believe that having a diverse workforce and a culture of inclusion are keys to unlock innovation. And for a technology company, innovation is the lifeblood of our business and the way that we can show up for our customers and deliver on the types of solutions and products that they expect from us. We're also a purpose-driven company. Our purpose is to create world-changing technology that enriches the lives of every person on Earth. And in order to do that, we must have a workforce that reflects the global opportunity and the markets that we serve. And finally, we believe that having a leadership role in the tech industry, particularly as it relates to creating a more inclusive and diverse workforce, is work that we have undertaken, but where we have invited and convened with other industry leaders to really drive meaningful, lasting change forward. This is such a big challenge and opportunity. It isn't really work that any one company can do. And we take our role in terms of leading that work, but participating and collaborating with other tech giants.
So important. And tell me, how is Intel using data to inform the work that you're doing in terms of diversity and inclusion?
Well, for more than a decade, we have voluntarily released our workforce representation data. And we do that both in terms of gender and ethnicity here in the US. And we believe that it's important to transparently share our data. Transparent data sharing is really rooted in accountability, and we just are firm believers that you measure what matters. And for us, that allows us to both celebrate the progress that we've made, but also identify the continuing challenges that we have and allow us to then invest and focus our initiatives and programs on those areas where we have more work to do. And an example of that is, in the way that we build all of this data into the reinforcing systems that we have. We have the data, showing us and helping us to make inclusive hiring approaches and decisions. We also use that data to inform the way that we reward our employees, both in terms of their bonus as well as in terms of promotion. We use data to take a look at where we're making progress. And one of the things that we know is that in the senior levels of our organization, many organizations, we don't see the level of representation of women and underrepresented minorities. So that allows us then to pinpoint the types of initiatives and trainings and efforts to try to close some of those gaps.
Absolutely. And so many organizations really struggle with moving the dial on diversity and inclusion. And it sounds like you all are definitely making progress there. What are some of the other things that Intel is doing to help move the dial on diversity and inclusion?
Well, we believe that a public-private partnership is key to driving this lasting change. And so with the new administration coming in, we were very encouraged to see that our priorities are very much aligned to their priorities. So we're looking forward to collaborating on closing the digital divide with a strengthened effort around broadband access for everyone. Another example is in economic and educational equality. We have an initiative, we call it 30-30-30, where we're partnering with 30 governments, 30,000 institutions to bring AI skills to over 30 million people, because these are the skills for the workforce of the future. We have another initiative where we're partnering with local government, our AI for Youth program, where we're specifically targeting community colleges because those are institutions that attract a broad array of diverse students with broad backgrounds and experience, and allowing them to also participate in economic growth and opportunity. So there are many ways that we can work with public institutions in the private sector, and then we can also all join efforts to drive and accelerate the lasting change. And one perhaps final example here is an effort that we've launched this year called the Global Inclusion Index, where we're partnering with other tech and tech adjacent companies to establish a common terminology, common vernacular, common set of metrics that we're all going to report out together, where we're sharing best practices for how we move not only our own organizations and companies forward, but how we move the entire industry forward in all issues of social equity, educational opportunity, and of course, having a diverse and inclusive workforce.
Very powerful. And then just in terms of policies that you believe policymakers need to be aware of in terms of affecting social inequity, what would you point to?
Well, we certainly believe that investing in nonprofits that are doing important work in terms of rooting out systemic injustice is important. We are contributing to institutions like UNESCO and Vera Institute for Justice and Policy Link. But again, I'll go back to really addressing the policy issues around closing the digital divide, investing in STEM education, and really partnering in order to upskill the entire workforce to be ready for the future.
Yeah, important now, perhaps more than ever. Thank you so much for these insights and your perspective, and hopefully real ways that we can affect change at this moment in time. And now over to Ina.
Thanks so much, Dominique. Our final guest is the representative of New York's 9th Congressional District, Representative Yvette Clarke, joining us from Brooklyn, New York. Thank you so much, Representative Clarke.
Thank you for having me, Ina. It's great to be with you today.
I'm really glad we're having this conversation because I feel like when we talk about, tech and data, and we're so focused often on some of the past things where we're talking about who posts what on social media. And, this era we're entering where we have so much data on people is so much more than that. And I know you've really looked at this issue, and there seem to be two sides. I mean, one is, how can we harness this data for precision medicine, better government, all those things. And the other is, how do we make sure individuals have the liberty that they need to own their data, to be in control of it? How big a role do you think that government, particularly at the federal level, has to play in both of these issues?
Well, I'm of the opinion that with such a huge adoption of the use of technology, it is critical that we get ahead of the curve. The tech space, telecommunications, has become sort of the Wild West of, our democracy. And, as you said, there's a lot that big data, gathering data, utilizing it can be great in making advances in our civil society. The other side to that is, it can become a mirror of some of the inequities that exist in the real world, for lack of a better term. Because indeed, it's a reflection of our humanity, and that reflection can be programmed into, those reflections can be programmed into the algorithms of the artificial intelligence that drives the use of big data. And so I think it's important that we really take our time to unpack what we need as a society to see from our use of technology. What are the benefits? And then mitigate the burdens, mitigate the bad circumstances that can arise if we don't do the work up front and make the demands for accountability and responsibility.
And how do you think the industry is doing, sort of left to its own devices? Because right now there's very little federal regulation of this. How are the tech companies doing sort of on their own, and where do you think government needs to act?
As I've stated, it's a double-edged sword. We're talking to one another today due to technological advances. I'm here in Brooklyn, and then I'm speaking with you. However, data programmed incorrectly with baked-in biases can be harmful to citizens, in our nation. Whether it's determining, how one is able to purchase a home, get a student loan, or it is being able to actually have access to the infrastructure that children need for remote learning. There's a whole package that we have got to get connected, that we have got to have rules of the road with, that we are really just beginning to come to grips with. And I think it all starts with a real deep dive and conversation with and into the use of technology and with the companies that are providing us the services that we need and that are gathering our data to make decisions about what we need.
And as you point out, data has all these potential possibilities, but it's only as accurate and fair and unbiased as the algorithms that process it and the data sets that are chosen. The tech industry is not known for being particularly diverse. It's known for being dominated by white males. How concerned are you that the people with the bright sensitivities are being in the room when these decisions are made? And how do you even go about ensuring that?
Well, I really believe that what we're seeing in sort of the growth of the tech industry is indicative of a number of the biases that exist, again, in every corner and facet of our lives here. Whether it be a corporation that provides financial services, or a healthcare industry that is providing telehealth. Within every entity, if there is not a true reflection of the diversity of our nation, without decision makers being at the table, just sort of unpacking of the products and the services that are being provided, there will always be the trap of groupthink. There will always be, the inclination towards biases that individuals hold about other individuals. And with that comes a set of presumptions that are baked into the programming of and the training of algorithms in a way in which it advantages some and disadvantages other. we have to work through this to bring neutrality, real neutrality to the systems that are being used. If not, we're only repeating a lot of the inequities that continue to plague our society. And that's why I introduced the Algorithmic Accountability Act, because we do have to get to the bottom of this. And what this bill would do is make sure, what it would do is it requires the FTC to really make sure that data on over 1 million users with companies that with companies that gather data on over 1 million users or with a revenue greater than 50 million to conduct bias and security assessments of highly sensitive automated decision-making systems, and then fix any issue that they identify. And I think that that's critical. Most of what we're dealing with is in the private domain. We need to make sure that our corporations, our technological corporations, our technology firms are good citizens. And one way of doing that is to have the FTC on the beat, really enforcing what we know is critical to weed out bias and discrimination.
And we've talked about this from a pretty theoretical level, but as you alluded to in the beginning, this has very real consequences, whether it's who gets a loan, who gets into college, who gets healthcare. These decisions are pretty monumental. And I know you've been concerned not only with who's in the room, but also who's being listened to. Obviously, a lot of people have read about Google pushing out one of the foremost data scientists, an ethical AI specialist, a Black woman named Timnit Gebru. And you sent a letter, I believe, to the company asking for answers. How concerned are you that it's not just who's in the room, but that companies aren't necessarily even listening to the experts that they have around how this should be done?
Well, I mean, again, it's in their best interest to do so. Because the one thing that we know about technology is that, it's not static, it's very dynamic. And whoever cracks the code on ultimately having true inclusive decision-making will win in the end, because we know what bias creates in our society, the inequity. And it's very clear that we've reached a point where that is given wide recognition across civil society. Those who are stuck in the past will be left there. And those who understand the significance of having decision-making that is reflective of the consumer base, of the society in which we live, will ultimately be those that flourish. And I know that sounds pretty flowery, but I really want to make sure that the public is educated and informed. Because with that, we're armed with the tools to make the changes that need to be made. And we also hold the companies accountable for the ways in which they perpetuate harm in certain respects and reward where they're doing good.
Well, I'd love to talk longer, but unfortunately we're out of time. We'll certainly be keeping an eye on what comes out of this, whether the new Congress is able to pass some of that legislation you've been talking about. Thank you so much, Representative Clarke.
Thank you for having me, Ina.
Thank all of you for joining us for another afternoon of virtual conversations. I hope this has made everyone smarter, faster. Thanks to sponsor Intel for making it possible. If you enjoyed this conversation, we can be in your inbox every morning on a variety of subjects. I do Login, Axios' tech newsletter. You can sign up for any of our newsletters at getlogin.axios.com or download the Axios app. Thank you all for joining, and we'll see you at the next event and on Axios.com.